It was the early hours in Rome when the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang out hesitantly. Unlike the solemn ritual that echoes during funerals, this sound came late, almost like a shameful reflex to a tragedy that was not yet meant to be known. Within the Vatican walls, the news spread like a forbidden whisper: the Holy Father was dead. No official statement. No medical bulletin. Only silence, dense, heavy, and more revealing than any word. Journalist Luca Moretti was awakened by an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was muffled, as if speaking from inside a confessional. "He didn't die in his sleep. And you need to see this." Before he could reply, the call dropped. Half an hour later, a plain brown envelope was discreetly slipped under the door of his small apartment in Trastevere. Inside were three things: a printed photo showing the Pope's body with bruises on his arms, a copy of an entry log that had been erased from the official records of the Swiss Guard, and a handwritten note with a short sentence. He knew too much. Benedict XVI had resigned. Francis had ruled for years. But this man, the last pontiff, whose name we will not mention for reasons that will soon become clear, was known for his discreet yet reformist profile. He had begun an internal cleanup, dismissed officials linked to financial scandals, supported victims of sexual abuse, and behind closed doors, he had talked about opening the Vatican's secret archives to the world. Luca knew something smelled wrong. Hours after the death, the Holy See issued a generic statement. His Holiness passed away peacefully in his sleep in his residence following a brief illness. Illness? The Pope had recent medical checkups, was actively working, and according to Cardinal Angelo Villani, one of the few people to see him in the last 24 hours, had been joking and reading aloud excerpts from St. Augustine the night before. Why then was the Vatican vehemently refusing a public autopsy? Why were the security camera recordings from the top floor of the Casa Santa Marta, where the Pope resided, mysteriously unavailable? Luca reached out to his contact inside the Vatican press office, a former employee fired 2 months earlier for unauthorized leaking of documents. She met him at a quiet cafe on Via della Conciliation. Her name was Elena. She looked nervous. "He was being watched," she said. "There were people inside the Vatican who wanted him to step down. When they realized he wouldn't, and worse that he would start speaking out, they knew only one option remained." She handed Luca a digital copy of the Pope's confidential agenda. Several recent dates included meetings with controversial figures, investigators of financial scandals, exorcists dismissed by the Church, and, oddly, 2 former members of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, which had been dissolved without explanation months earlier. There was also one highlighted note. "Deliver documents to Luca M. before the 17th. If anything happens to me, he must know the truth." A chill ran down Luca's spine. The Pope knew him? Had planned to entrust him with evidence? And why was the 17th so important? The next night he went to St. Peter's Square. The lights were off, except for a faint golden glow atop the Basilica dome. The square, usually lively, was empty. Swiss guards were visibly reinforced. A morning that felt more like surveillance than reverence. Luca returned to the original envelope and decided to dig into the second document, the entry log. It showed that the night before the death, 3 individuals had entered Casa Santa Marta at 11:47 p.m., a highly unusual time. The names were blacked out, but the access code indicated high-level clearance. However, this log was deleted from the digital archive at 4 a.m., just minutes before the unofficial announcement of the Pope's death. Coincidence? When he tried to contact an internal source from the Swiss Guard, Luca received a short, encrypted message. "Don't look into this. There are things even the Vatican no longer controls." The pieces were starting to come together, though still in a haze. A Pope ready to reform. Documents on the brink of exposure. Mysterious visitors. Vanishing records. Delayed bells. And now, a shadow of conspiracy hanging over the most sacred throne in Christendom. Luca knew that if he kept going he would be risking his life. But he also knew that to stop would be to silence the last voice that tried to tear through the veil of omission and absolute power. And in that hush of the bells, he heard the calling. Not from God, but from the truth. The Vatican holds archives as ancient as the Roman Empire itself. It's estimated that over 85 kilometers of shelves store centuries worth of documents, manuscripts, letters, and records that have never seen the light of day. It is the largest sealed archive in the world. And within it, according to rumors, lies far more than the Church's history. State secrets, silent pacts, suppressed heresies, and names that were never meant to be spoken. Luca Moretti knew that to understand the Pope's death, he would have to go beyond public corridors and coldly worded statements. He needed to reach what the cardinals themselves whisper about: the Archivum Obscurum, the Shadow Archive. But no one enters it without permission. And no one gets permission unless they are absolutely trusted by the Vatican. The key, however, was closer than he imagined. Elena, the former press office employee, had briefly worked with a Monsignor in the archive cataloging department. An erudite man, soft-spoken, with strangely nocturnal habits. Monsignor Raphael Corsi. She believed he knew more than he let on. Luca and Elena arranged a meeting with Corsi at an old bookstore near the Pantheon. He agreed, but insisted it be in broad daylight, unusual for a man who rarely left the Vatican walls. "If what you're looking for is in the records I know, you won't like what you'll find." Raphael didn't deny that the Pope had been frequenting an unlisted section of the archives, an isolated area with no cameras. He had seen him enter alone, which was extremely rare, carrying documents and wearing a tense expression. Just days before his death, the Pope had said to him, "The church was built on stone. But today, Raphael, it crawls over bones." With Raphael's help, Luca gained clandestine access to Sector 8B, on the western wing of the archives, a subterranean labyrinth still using manual locks and outdated climate control systems. It felt like entering a crypt made of paper and dust. There, between silent shelves, they found a small wooden box, hand-carved with the papal coat of arms. Inside were documents that belonged to no known canonical or historical process. There were bank records of hidden offshore accounts, tied to shell foundations registered by high-ranking clergy. Millions in misappropriated funds, disguised as philanthropic donations. Internal reports from halted investigations into sexual abuse cases, with notes suggesting victims were silenced through payments and threats. And most disturbing, encrypted correspondences between senior clergy and an organization identified only as Ordo V, Order of the Scarlet Veil. Luca felt the weight of what he was holding. But this was only the surface. One of the documents included a report dated 6 months before the Pope's death. It was a security analysis by a trusted Swiss Guard agent warning of a growing presence of radical elements within the Roman Curia, hostile to papal reforms and sympathetic to an obscure ideological line, aligned with political and economic power over Christian dogma. The Pope, according to a handwritten Latin note, intended to dissolve the group urgently. The date set for this? March 17th, the very day he was found dead. But the most shocking revelation came from a small flash drive hidden in the box's lining. When plugged into a laptop disconnected from the internet, Luca discovered audio recordings from private sessions with a Vatican exorcist who had been dismissed in 2019, Father Ignazio Bruni. In these conversations, the Pope confided visions, dreams, and a growing sense that he was being watched by eyes that do not belong to men. They move in shadows. They respond neither to faith nor reason. Within the Vatican, there is a power that does not kneel before God. It was hard to tell whether the Pope was speaking metaphorically or if his mind was unraveling. But the tone was clear. He feared for his life and believed the evil he faced was more than just corruption. Luca left the archive with digital copies and notes, but one thing unsettled him. There was no official testament, no final statement, no farewell letter from the Pope. It was as if his death had been so abrupt that even he, despite all the signs, hadn't expected it that day. Leaving the Vatican, Luca noticed he was being followed. A man in a dark suit, wearing earpieces, appeared twice. Once while crossing Piazza Navona, and again at the Ottaviano metro station. Luca altered his route and lost him. When he returned home, he found his apartment ransacked. Nothing had been stolen, except the original envelope he had received the day the Pope died. But Luca already knew. What he had uncovered could no longer be contained. The Order of the Scarlet Veil was real, and he had just crossed the line. The name Ordo V kept appearing among the documents Luca Moretti now examined like a man standing at the edge of an abyss. The Order of the Scarlet Veil, once just a vague reference, was now revealing itself as the hidden machinery behind papal decisions, political manipulations, and perhaps even the very death of the Pope. But who were they? And what did they want? Elena, now deeply involved in the investigation, reached out to a contact in the Vatican Gendarmerie, a retired agent who, under anonymity, revealed something disturbing. The Scarlet Veil has existed since the Council of Trent. They are the Church's shadow. While the Pope preaches, they protect what they call the non-negotiable essence. They don't serve God. They serve power. According to this source, the order is composed of cardinals, bishops, bankers, and intelligence agents from various countries. Their mission is not to evangelize, but to preserve the influence of the Holy See at all costs, even if it means betraying the very principles of faith. The symbol of the order is a blood-red veil embroidered with the Latin phrase, Veritas obumbrata, the truth hidden. And the most unsettling detail, the order's headquarters wasn't located in any archive or papal hall, but in a crypt beneath the chapel of St. Marcellinus, a church rarely open to the public where, according to lost records, they had been gathering since the 16th century. Luca and Elena decided to investigate. They gained access to the chapel under the pretext of filming a historical documentary. The simple, forgotten facade stood in stark contrast to what they found below. A narrow staircase hidden behind a side altar led to a stone chamber with an ancient altar and markings on the walls. Latin inscriptions, unknown symbols, inverted crosses carved with knives. At the center of the room stood a marble pedestal holding an iron box locked with 3 seals. Luca took photographs of everything, but before they could open or remove anything, footsteps echoed on the stairs. Someone knew they were there. They escaped through an emergency exit in the sacristy basement, but not before hearing a voice from the darkness of the crypt, male, cold, and loud. "It's too late. The Pope died because he broke the pact. Now you've crossed the line too." That night, Elena disappeared. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was empty. No signs of forced entry. Just one thing left on the table, a book, The Prophecies of Malachi, open to the page listing the prophetic names of the popes. The final name, according to the prophecy, was Petrus Romanus, under whom the church would fall into ruin. Luca understood. There was a message. She had been taken. Or worse. In the following days, a disinformation campaign began targeting Luca. His name was linked to conspiracy theories, hacking of church archives, and fabricated accusations of sacrilege. Blogs funded by shadowy entities spread his image online, trying to destroy his credibility. But what struck him the hardest was a message delivered in an unmarked envelope. A photo of Elena, gagged. And a handwritten note. "Stop. Or she will be the next sacrifice." Even so, Luca decided to press on. Using the material he had, he compiled a dossier containing proof of the Scarlet Veil's existence, the names of some current members, evidence of financial misconduct, connections with governments and corporations, and a detailed account of the orchestration behind the Pope's silencing. He also included excerpts from the recordings in which the Pope spoke about the order. "They surround me in suits and cassocks. They smile in the hallways but pray against me at midnight. They say the church needs stability, but what they really want is silence. Absolute silence." Luca prepared to leak the dossier to international media. But before he could send it, he noticed his connection had been intercepted. Someone was inside his system. Worse, there was a tracking device in his car. He was now the target. On his last night in Rome, Luca sought refuge in a remote parish in the Garbatella district. There, an elderly priest named Father Domenico welcomed him without asking questions. Seeing Luca's condition, the priest only said, "My son, it's not faith that's hunting you. It's the fear of those who lost their soul trying to protect it." Before falling asleep, Luca made one last entry in the digital journal he had kept as a backup. "If you're reading this, know this: the Scarlet Veil is real, and they are in control. The Pope tried to warn the world. They silenced him. Now there is only one choice left: speak or die trying." 2 weeks after Elena's disappearance and the beginning of the hunt against him, Luca Moretti was no longer an investigative journalist. He was a man on the fringes of the world, hunted by forces that operated in the sacred shadows. He moved between cities, changing phone numbers, identities, even his face. He slept with one eye open and kept a flash drive in his pocket at all times, the final fragment of truth left behind by the dead Pope. But he hadn't yet listened to the full contents of the device. Until that night. Hidden in an abandoned monastery in the mountains of Piedmont, using a laptop connected to an offline network, Luca finally opened the file labeled only Confessio Finalis _117. The image flickered. The recording had been captured with a discreet, perhaps hidden, camera. The setting was familiar, the Pope's private office inside Casa Santa Marta. He was alone, wearing only the white cassock and a simple crucifix. His face, worn by time, bore more than fatigue, it held absolute fear. The Pope began to speak. "If this recording has reached you, then what I feared has come to pass." He paused, breathing deeply. "The church I serve is no longer the same. There is an ancient disease growing beneath our feet, a silent plague that feeds on blind obedience and omission." He spoke of the Scarlet Veil. "They do not kneel to God. They kneel to themselves. They believe they are guardians of the faith, but they are merely servants of fear and power. I tried to stop them. I tried to expose the truth. But I was warned, then watched, and now I know my time has come. His eyes welled with tears. But his voice remained steady. The blood spilled over centuries cries out for justice. Abuse, silence, Pacts. It's all in the archives I left with a man named Luca Moretti. Let him bring to the world what I, out of cowardice or caution, could not. Luca felt the weight of those words crush him like a cross. If I die, don't say it was God's will. Say it was the will of men who no longer know what God is. The recording ended with the Pope making the sign of the cross. Then silence. Luca cried. For the first time since the investigation began, he realized he wasn't just a journalist chasing a headline. He was a vessel for truth, a link between what the world needed to know and what someone had died trying to reveal. He decided to act. He compiled a fully encrypted package containing all the evidence: recordings, documents, names of members of the Scarlet Veil, financial transactions, and the Pope's complete dossier. He scheduled simultaneous distribution to 20 major international news outlets, from the New York Times to Le Monde, BBC to El País. He also activated a fail-safe trigger, ensuring that if he were killed, the contents would be automatically released to open networks. But something went wrong. Just minutes before the scheduled send, the computer screen flickered. A red-lettered message appeared. You have been located. The monastery lights began to blink. A low radio hum pierced the silence. Footsteps echoed through the stone corridor. Luca ran. He escaped through the sacristy's rear exit and fled into the woods, flash drive still in hand. But he knew, time had run out. 3 days later, the world received a minor headline, buried between economic updates and international politics. Italian journalist disappears under mysterious circumstances in the north of the country. Luca Moretti, investigative reporter, had allegedly become involved in conspiracy theories against the Catholic Church. Authorities ruled out foul play. But the leaked data wasn't destroyed. It was recovered by a network of independent journalists who had traced the partial transmissions. Fragments of files, audio clips, and leaked images began to circulate on encrypted forums and underground research communities. Bit by bit, the truth found cracks in the wall of silence. The Holy See denied all accusations. They claimed forgery, manipulation, coordinated attacks against Christian faith. No official investigation was opened. No names were punished. But inside the Curia, doors quietly began to close. Figures once untouchable were discreetly removed. A sense of paranoia took hold. And in a forgotten corner of the Vatican gardens, a small plaque was placed without ceremony. Truth is the daughter of time, not of authority. Galileo Galilei. Epilogue. On an anonymous server hosted somewhere in Eastern Europe, a file still circulates to this day. Pope Underster Confession, Inal.zip. No one knows if it's real. No one knows who keeps it alive. But every year, on the anniversary of the last Pope's death, the file is shared again. And with it, a single phrase, heard in the final seconds of the confession. If light cannot enter through open doors, it will find the cracks. Because even beneath scarlet veils, truth always bleeds its way to the surface.